If you'd told Julia Evans, just 6 months ago, that she and her 2 kids would be standing on the windswept shore of a private island no one in her family had ever mentioned, she would have laughed, maybe even cried. But that was before the letter, before the lawyer's call, before the impossible hope that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe hands you a key to a door you never knew existed. Before we dive into this story of mystery, resilience, and a discovery that would change everything, make sure to hit subscribe. Tomorrow I'll share another story that proves life's greatest treasures are often hidden in the most unexpected places. Julia's story didn't begin with an island. It began in a cramped apartment above a noisy street, where the only view was a brick wall, and the only certainty was the next bill. She was 34, a single mom, and the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. Her son Max was 12, quiet, thoughtful, and obsessed with maps. Her daughter Zoe was 8, fearless, creative, and always asking why. Julia had spent years juggling 2 jobs, scraping by, and doing her best to keep the lights on and her kids' dreams alive. She'd never expected a miracle. She'd stopped believing in them a long time ago. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, sandwiched between a credit card bill and a pizza flyer. The envelope was thick, the paper creamy and expensive, her name written in a looping, old-fashioned hand. She almost threw it away, thinking it was another scam. But something about the weight of it made her pause. She opened it at the kitchen table, the kids arguing over homework in the next room. Dear Ms. Evans, we regret to inform you of the passing of your great-uncle Charles Whitaker. As the executor of his estate, I am writing to notify you that you are the sole beneficiary of his last will and testament. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of your inheritance. Julia stared at the letter, her mind racing. She barely remembered Uncle Charles, a distant relative who'd sent her a birthday card once when she was a child. She'd never met him, never even seen a photo. The idea that he'd left her anything was absurd. But the letter was real. The law firm's name embossed in gold at the top. She called the number, her hands shaking. The lawyer, Mr. Grayson, was polite but reserved. Ms. Evans, your great-uncle's estate is unusual. He owned a property off the coast of Maine, an island, actually. It's been in the family for generations, but no one's lived there in decades. There are some conditions attached, but the property is yours, free and clear. An island, Julia repeated. Sure she'd misheard. Yes, it's called Whitaker's Haven. There's a house, some outbuildings, and about 40 acres of land. The title and all associated documents are ready for transfer. I'd recommend visiting as soon as possible. There are items on the property that may require your attention. Julia hung up, stunned. An island. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale. She told Max and Zoe that night, expecting disbelief or laughter. Instead, Max's eyes grew wide. Like a real island? With a beach and everything? That's what the lawyer said, Zoe grinned. Can we go? Please, Mom, please. Julia hesitated. She had no money for a trip, no time off work, and no idea what she'd find. But something in her kids' faces, a spark she hadn't seen in years, made her say yes. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was hope. A week later, they were on a bus to the coast, their entire lives packed into 3 battered suitcases. The ferry to Whitaker's Haven was small and old, piloted by a man named Gus, who'd known her great-uncle. He was a good man, your uncle, Gus said as the boat chugged through the fog. Kept to himself, but always had a kind word. Said the island was special. Said it kept its secrets. The island appeared out of the mist like something conjured from a dream. Rocky cliffs, dense pine forests, a crescent of white sand. The house was perched on a rise, its windows staring out to sea. It was bigger than Julia expected, weathered but sturdy, with a wraparound porch and a red door. There was a barn, a boathouse, and what looked like an old greenhouse, its glass panes glinting in the weak sunlight. Inside, the house smelled of salt and cedar. Dust motes danced in the light. The furniture was old but solid, the walls lined with books and faded photographs. Julia found a letter on the kitchen table, her name written in the same looping hand. Welcome home, Julia. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I hope you'll find what I never could. The island is yours now. Take care of it, and it will take care of you. There are secrets here, some worth keeping, some worth sharing. Trust your instincts. And remember, the greatest treasures are often hidden in plain sight. Charles, Max, and Zoe explored every inch of the house, their excitement contagious. Look, Mom, there's a secret staircase. There's a trap door in the pantry. Julia followed them, her worries fading with every discovery. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace. That night, after the kids were asleep, Julia sat on the porch, listening to the waves. She wondered what her great-uncle had meant about secrets. She wondered if she was strong enough to start over, to build a life in a place she'd never known. But as the moon rose over Whitaker's Haven, she felt a quiet certainty settle in her chest. This was their chance, their adventure. Whatever the island held, they would face it together. The first morning on Whitaker's Haven dawned bright and cold, the kind of crisp air that made every breath feel new. Julia woke to the sound of gulls and the distant crash of waves, a world away from the city's sirens and car horns. For a moment, she forgot the weight of bills and deadlines. For a moment, she was just a mother, waking up in a house that belonged to her, on land that stretched as far as she could see. Max was already up, poring over an old map he'd found in the study. "Mom, look at this. There are trails all over the island. And see this?" He pointed to a spot marked with a faded X. "What do you think it means?" Zoe was in the kitchen, her face smudged with flour. "I found pancake mix! Can we have pancakes for breakfast?" Julia smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in years. "Of course. Let's make it a tradition. First breakfast on the island, pancakes every time." They ate together at the big wooden table, sunlight streaming through the windows. After breakfast, they set out to explore. The island was wild and beautiful, with mossy paths winding through pine forests and rocky outcrops overlooking the sea. They found an old swing hanging from a gnarled oak, a rowboat pulled up on the shore, and a weathered sign that read, "Whitaker's Haven, Estent 1889. As they walked, Julia felt the tension in her shoulders ease. The kids ran ahead, their laughter echoing through the trees. For the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the fresh start they needed. They reached the spot Max had seen on the map, a clearing at the island's highest point, where the trees parted to reveal a breathtaking view of the ocean. In the center of the clearing stood a stone marker, its surface carved with names and dates. Julia traced the letters with her fingers, recognizing her great-uncle's name among them. "Is it a grave?" Zoe asked, her voice hushed. "I don't think so," Julia said. "I think it's a memorial. For everyone who's lived here." Max knelt beside the marker, brushing away leaves. "There's something here." He pointed to a small metal box, half buried at the base of the stone. Julia helped him dig it out, her heart pounding. Inside was a faded photograph of a young woman standing on the island's shore, a gold locket around her neck, and a note written in the same looping hand as the letter in the house. "To whoever finds this, family is more than blood. It's the stories we share, the secrets we keep, the love we pass down. This island has always been a place of refuge. If you're here, you belong." C.W. Julia felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at her children, their faces bright with curiosity and hope. "We belong here," she said softly. They spent the rest of the day exploring. In the barn, they found old tools, fishing rods, and a battered trunk filled with journals and letters. In the greenhouse, Zoe discovered a tangle of overgrown vines and a single blooming rose. "It's magic," she whispered, cupping the flower in her hands. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, Julia sat on the porch with the kids, reading aloud from one of the journals. The entries were filled with stories of storms weathered, crops planted, and celebrations held. There were sketches of the island, recipes for chowder and bread, and lists of birds spotted in the trees. One entry caught Julia's eye. June 12, 1947 found another piece of the puzzle today. "The old well by the North Cliffs. There's something hidden beneath the stones. I'll need to wait for low tide to investigate further." Max's eyes widened. "A puzzle? Do you think it's treasure?" Julia laughed. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just another story waiting to be discovered." That night, after the kids were asleep, Julia sat by the window, the journal open in her lap. She thought about the secrets her great-uncle had hinted at, the mysteries woven into the fabric of the island. She wondered what she would find if she was brave enough to look. As the wind rattled the windows and the sea whispered its ancient song, Julia made a promise to herself and her children. They would explore every inch of Whitaker's Haven. They would uncover its secrets, honor its history, and build a new life together. Whatever the island held, treasure or not, they would face it as a family. The next morning, the island was shrouded in mist, the world reduced to shades of gray and silver. Julia woke to the sound of Max and Zoe whispering excitedly in the hallway. "Mom, can we go to the North Cliffs today?" Max asked, clutching the journal with the mysterious entry about the old well. Julia nodded, her curiosity piqued. "Let's pack a lunch and make a day of it." They set out after breakfast, following the winding trail that led through the pine forest and up a gentle slope toward the northern edge of the island. The air was cool and damp, the ground soft beneath their feet. As they walked, Max read aloud from the journal, his voice steady and clear. June 14th, 1947. Low tide at dawn. "The stones were heavier than I remembered, but I managed to move them. There's a chamber beneath the well, dry even at high tide. I left a marker for anyone who comes after me. The secret is safe for now." Zoe skipped ahead, her red rain boots splashing in puddles. Do you think we'll find the chamber? We'll find something, Julia said, her heart beating faster with every step. The cliffs loomed ahead, jagged and wild, the sea crashing far below. They found the old well easily, a circle of moss-covered stones half hidden by brambles. Max knelt beside it, brushing away leaves and dirt. There's a symbol carved here, he said, tracing a spiral with his finger. Julia helped him clear the stones, her hands growing numb from the cold. Beneath the top layer, they found a flat slab of granite with a rusted iron ring set into its center. Together they pulled, the stone shifting with a groan. Beneath it was a dark hole, a ladder descending into the earth. Should we go down? Zoe asked, her eyes wide. Julia hesitated, then nodded. I'll go first. Max, you come after me. Zoe, you last. Stay close. The ladder creaked but held. The air grew cooler as they descended, the light from above fading to a thin gray line. At the bottom, Julia's feet touched solid ground. She shone her flashlight around, revealing a small chamber carved from stone. The walls were lined with shelves, each holding glass jars, tin boxes, and bundles wrapped in oilcloth. Max's voice echoed in the darkness. It's like a time capsule. They explored the chamber, opening boxes and unwrapping bundles. Inside, they found coins from different countries, old maps, a compass, and a stack of letters tied with a blue ribbon. Julia opened one, her hands trembling. August 3rd, 1942, if you're reading this, you are family. This place was built to keep our history safe. The world outside changes, but here our stories endure. There is more to find. Look for the sign of the spiral. Zoe found a small wooden box with a carved spiral on its lid. Inside was a locket, identical to the one in the photograph they'd found at the memorial. Julia held it in her palm, feeling the weight of generations. They spent hours in the chamber, reading letters and piecing together the story of the island. It had been a refuge during wars, a sanctuary for those fleeing danger, a place where secrets were kept and shared. Julia realized that her great-uncle hadn't just left her a piece of land. He'd entrusted her with a legacy. When they finally climbed back into the daylight, the mist had lifted, revealing a sky as blue as hope. They sat on the edge of the cliff, eating sandwiches and watching the waves crash below. Do you think there's more? Max asked, his eyes shining. I think there's always more, Julia said. Every family has secrets. Every place has stories. We just have to be willing to look. That night as they sat by the fire, Julia read aloud from the letters they'd found. The words spoke of courage and loss, of love and sacrifice, of the unbreakable bonds that held the family together. She looked at her children, their faces illuminated by the flickering light, and felt a sense of belonging she'd never known before. The island was no longer just a place. It was a promise, a chance to start over, to build something lasting, to honor the past while forging a new future. Julia knew there would be challenges ahead, mysteries yet to unravel, but for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face them. As the fire burned low and the stars appeared one by one in the night sky, Julia whispered a silent thank you to her great-uncle, to the ancestors who had come before, and to the island itself. Whatever secrets Whitaker's Haven held, she and her children would uncover them, together. The following days settled into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient. Each morning, Julia woke to the sound of the sea and the laughter of her children. They explored the island's trails, cataloged the treasures they'd found in the chamber, and began restoring the old house room by room. The work was hard, but it was honest, and every nail hammered, every window cleaned, made the place feel more like home. One afternoon, as Julia was sorting through a box of her great-uncle's papers in the attic, she found a faded blueprint tucked between two ledgers. It was a map of the island, but not like any they'd seen before. This one was covered in handwritten notes, arrows, and symbols. In the lower right corner, a message was scrawled in Charles's looping hand. The heart of the island is not what it seems. Look beneath the oldest tree, Julia's curiosity flared. She called Max and Zoe upstairs, showing them the blueprint. Max's eyes lit up. The oldest tree? That has to be the big oak by the South Cove. It's huge! Zoe bounced on her toes. Let's go. Maybe there's more treasure. They packed a backpack with snacks, a flashlight, and the blueprint, then set off toward the South Cove. The path wound through thick ferns and wildflowers, sunlight dappling the ground. The oak tree stood alone at the edge of the cove, its branches sprawling wide, roots twisting deep into the earth. Julia circled the tree, running her hand along the rough bark. There's something carved here, she said, brushing away moss. A spiral, just like the one on the box in the chamber. Max knelt at the base of the tree, searching for loose stones or hidden compartments. Zoe poked at the roots with a stick. Suddenly she squealed. Mom, there's a hole! Julia knelt beside her, peering into the darkness. The hole was just big enough for a hand. She reached in, her fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. Carefully, she pulled out a small iron key, its handle shaped like a spiral. Max examined the blueprint. There's a mark here right by the tree. It looks like a trapdoor. They searched the ground, feeling for anything unusual. After several minutes, Max's foot struck something hard. He knelt, scraping away dirt and leaves, revealing a square of old wood set into the earth. Julia fit the key into a rusted lock, twisting until it clicked. Together they lifted the trapdoor, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. "Should we go?" Zoe whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. Julia nodded, her heart pounding. "We'll go together. Stay close." The staircase was steep and cold, the air thick with the scent of earth and old secrets. At the bottom, they found themselves in a stone chamber much larger than the first. The walls were lined with shelves, each holding objects wrapped in oilcloth or stored in wooden crates. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it, a leather-bound book. Julia opened the book, her hands shaking. The pages were filled with names, dates, and stories, an unbroken record of everyone who had ever lived on the island, from the first Whitaker to the present day. There were sketches of the island, recipes, poems, and even pressed flowers. It was a family archive, a living history. Max found a crate filled with coins, jewelry, and old documents. Zoe discovered a box of letters written in French, tied with a red ribbon. Julia realized that this was more than a treasure trove. It was a time capsule, a testament to the lives and loves that had shaped the island. As they explored, Julia found a letter addressed to her, written in her great-uncle's hand. "Dear Julia, if you're reading this, you've found the heart of the island. This place is more than land and stone. It's a legacy. Everything here belongs to you and your children. Use it wisely. Share its stories. Protect its secrets. And remember, the greatest treasure is the family you build and the memories you create. With love." Charles' tears filled Julia's eyes as she read the letter aloud. She looked at Max and Zoe, their faces glowing with wonder. "This is our story now," she said softly. "We're part of something bigger than ourselves." They spent hours in the chamber, cataloging the treasures and reading the stories. When they finally climbed back into the sunlight, Julia felt a sense of peace she'd never known before. The island was no longer a mystery, it was home. That night, as they sat around the fire, Julia told her children about the people who had come before them, their struggles, their triumphs, their dreams. She realized that the true value of the island wasn't in the gold or jewels, but in the stories, the love, and the hope passed down through generations. The days that followed were filled with a new sense of purpose. Julia and the kids made it their mission to restore the house and catalog every artifact they found, treating each discovery as a piece of their own unfolding adventure. Max created a detailed map of the island, marking every hidden chamber, ancient tree, and secret path. Zoe started a journal, filling it with sketches of wildflowers, birds, and the treasures they uncovered. Julia kept a logbook, recording their progress and the stories they pieced together from letters and journals. One morning, as Julia was repairing a broken window in the study, she heard the distant rumble of an engine. She stepped onto the porch and saw a small boat approaching the island's dock. Her heart skipped. No one was supposed to know they were here. Max and Zoe ran to her side, curiosity and a hint of fear in their eyes. A tall man in a windbreaker stepped off the boat, carrying a briefcase. He waved, friendly but formal. "Ms. Evans? I'm Peter Langley, from the law firm handling your great-uncle's estate. I hope I'm not intruding." Julia relaxed a little, though she stayed cautious. "Of course. What brings you out here?" Peter smiled. "I wanted to deliver some documents in person. There are a few things about the inheritance that are best explained face-to-face." He handed her a thick envelope. "And I thought you might have questions." They sat on the porch, the kids listening intently as Peter explained. "Your great-uncle was a very private man, but he was also meticulous. He left detailed instructions for the transfer of the island, including a trust fund for its upkeep. The property is fully paid off, and the taxes are covered for the next 10 years. There's also a bank account in your name, with enough to cover repairs and living expenses for at least a year." Julia stared at him, stunned. I don't know what to say." Peter smiled kindly. "He wanted you to have a real chance, Miss Evans. He believed this island could be a new beginning for your family." Max grinned. "Does that mean we can stay?" Peter nodded. "As long as you want. There's just one condition. If you ever decide to sell the island, you must offer it first to the Whitaker Family Trust. Your great-uncle wanted to keep it in the family if possible." Julia felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Thank you. Really." After Peter left, Julia and the kids celebrated with a picnic on the beach. They talked about their plans for the island, restoring the greenhouse, planting a vegetable garden, maybe even opening a small guest house someday. For the first time, the future felt wide open, full of possibility. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Max brought out the old map he'd been working on. "There's one place we haven't explored yet," he said, pointing to a spot on the eastern shore marked with a question mark. "It looks like there used to be a dock there and maybe another building." Zoe's eyes sparkled. "Let's go tomorrow. Maybe there's another secret," Julia agreed, her curiosity piqued. The next morning, they set out early, following a narrow path through the woods. The air was thick with the scent of pine and salt. As they neared the eastern shore, they found the remains of an old dock, half collapsed into the water. Nearby, hidden by overgrown bushes, was a small stone cottage. The door creaked as Julia pushed it open. Inside, the cottage was filled with dust and cobwebs, but it was clear someone had lived there long ago. On a table by the window sat a wooden box, its lid carved with the familiar spiral symbol. Julia opened it, revealing a stack of letters, a faded photograph of a man and woman standing on the island's shore, and a small velvet pouch. Inside the pouch was a ring, gold, set with a deep blue sapphire. A note in the box read, "For the one who finds this, know that love endures, even when time and distance keep us apart." Julia felt tears prick her eyes. She realized that the island's greatest treasures weren't just material. They were the stories of love, hope, and resilience that had been passed down through generations. That night, as they sat around the fire, Julia slipped the ring onto her finger. She looked at her children, their faces glowing with happiness, and knew that they had truly found something priceless on Whitaker's Haven, a sense of belonging, a legacy of love, and the courage to build a new future together. The next morning, Julia awoke to the sound of rain tapping gently on the roof. The island felt wrapped in a soft gray mist, the world outside their windows blurred and dreamlike. She made coffee and watched Max and Zoe play a game of chess at the kitchen table, their laughter echoing through the old house. For the first time in years, Julia felt a sense of calm settle over her, a quiet certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. After breakfast, they decided to spend the rainy day exploring the attic, a place they'd only glanced at before. The stairs creaked as they climbed, the air growing cooler and dustier with each step. The attic was filled with trunks, boxes, and old furniture draped in sheets. Max immediately began opening boxes, searching for anything that might add to his map. Zoe found a stack of sketchbooks, their pages filled with drawings of the island in every season. Julia discovered a trunk marked Whitaker Family, Private. Inside, she found a collection of ledgers, diaries, and a heavy envelope sealed with red wax. She broke the seal and unfolded a set of legal documents, deeds, wills, and a letter from a Boston law firm dated 1923. The letter referenced a trust established by Julia's great-great-grandfather, designed to protect the island from creditors and outside interests. The trust, it seemed, was still active, and Julia was now its sole beneficiary. As she read, Julia realized the true scope of her inheritance. The trust included not just the island, but shares in several companies, some of which, she recognized, had grown into major corporations over the last century. There were stock certificates for a shipping company, a timber business, and even a small stake in a mining operation. Julia's hand shook as she did the math in her head. If these shares had been managed and reinvested over the decades, their value could be enormous. She called Max and Zoe over, showing them the documents. "I think we need to talk to Mr. Langley again," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and disbelief. They spent the afternoon cataloging everything they'd found, making a list of questions for the lawyer. Julia felt a strange mix of hope and anxiety. What if it was all a mistake? What if the shares were worthless, or the trust had been dissolved? But deep down, she sensed that her great-uncle had left her more than just a home. He'd left her a future. The next day, Julia called Peter Langley and explained what they'd found. He promised to come out to the island as soon as possible, bringing a financial advisor from the firm. When they arrived, Julia laid out the documents on the dining room table, her heart pounding as Peter and the advisor examined each one. After several hours of review, the advisor looked up, his expression a mix of awe and excitement. "Miss Evans, I believe you're sitting on a fortune. These shares have split and grown over the years. The trust's current value, including the land and assets, is likely in the hundreds of millions." Julia stared at him, speechless. Max and Zoe exchanged wide-eyed glances. "Does that mean we're rich?" Zoe whispered. Peter smiled. "It means you have options. You can use the trust to maintain the island, invest in your future, or support causes you care about. Your great-uncle wanted you to have security and the freedom to choose your own path." Julia felt tears of relief and gratitude well up in her eyes. For so long she'd struggled just to get by. Now she could give her children the life she'd always dreamed of and honor the legacy of the family that had come before. That night, as the rain cleared and the stars emerged, Julia stood on the porch, looking out over the island. She thought about the generations who had called Whitaker's Haven home, about the secrets they'd kept and the dreams they'd chased. She realized that the true treasure wasn't just the money or the land. It was the chance to build something lasting, to create a sanctuary for her family and for others who might need it someday. As she turned to go inside, Julia made a silent promise. She would protect the island, share its stories, and use her newfound fortune to make a difference. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she and her children would face them together, stronger, braver, and more hopeful than ever before. The news of Julia's inheritance spread quickly, first among the legal and financial circles, then to the small town on the mainland, and finally to the wider world. Reporters began calling the law firm, curious about the mysterious island and the single mother who had become its owner. Julia, wary of attention, declined all interviews, determined to protect her children's privacy and the island's peace. But the outside world had a way of creeping in. One afternoon, as Julia and the kids were repairing the old greenhouse, a letter arrived by courier. It was from a historical society in Boston, requesting permission to visit Whitaker's Haven and document its unique history. Julia hesitated, but after discussing it with Max and Zoe, she agreed to a single visit, on the condition that the island's location and their family's privacy would be respected. The historians arrived a week later, bringing cameras, notebooks, and a sense of reverence for the place. They marveled at the family archive, the hidden chambers, and the stories preserved in every corner of the house. One of the historians, Dr. Evelyn Carter, was especially fascinated by the spiral symbol that appeared throughout the island's history. This motif, Dr. Carter explained, is ancient. It represents continuity, growth, and the journey of life. Your family must have chosen it as a sign of resilience and hope. Julia smiled, feeling a deep connection to the generations who had come before. She watched as Max led the historians to the secret chamber beneath the oak tree, proudly explaining how they'd found the key and uncovered the family's legacy. Zoe showed off her journal, sharing her sketches and the stories she'd written about their adventures. The visit ended with a small ceremony at the memorial stone, where Dr. Carter read a passage from one of the earliest family journals. To those who come after, know that this island is more than earth and stone. It is a promise, a place where the weary may find rest, where the lost may find home, and where the brave may find their destiny. As the historians departed, Julia felt a sense of pride and responsibility settle over her. She realized that she was now the keeper of the island's stories, entrusted with preserving its past and shaping its future. With the historians' help, Julia began the process of cataloging the island's artifacts and digitizing the family archive. She worked late into the night, scanning letters, photographing heirlooms, and recording oral histories with Max and Zoe. The project brought them closer together, each of them discovering new facets of their family's story. One evening, as they sorted through a box of old photographs, Max found a faded map tucked behind a portrait. The map was different from the others, older, hand-drawn, and marked with cryptic symbols. At the bottom, in a spidery script, was a single word, sanctuary. Julia studied the map. Her curiosity piqued. It looks like there's another chamber. Here, near the western cliffs. Zoe's eyes sparkled. Another secret. Can we go tomorrow? Julia nodded, her heart racing with anticipation. The next morning, they set out early, following the map's winding path through the forest. The western cliffs were steep and wild, the sea crashing far below. They searched for hours, finally discovering a narrow crevice hidden by brambles. Inside, they found a small cave, its walls covered in carvings, spirals, names and dates stretching back centuries. In the center of the cave was a stone altar, and on it, a wooden box sealed with wax. Julia broke the seal and opened the box. Inside was a letter, written in French, and a pouch filled with gold coins and gemstones. The letter, once translated, revealed that the cave had been a sanctuary for refugees fleeing war and persecution, a place where the Whitaker family had offered shelter and hope to those in need. Julia felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Her family's legacy was not just one of wealth, but of compassion and courage. She realized that the true value of the island was not in its treasures, but in the lives it had touched and the hope it had offered. That night, as they sat around the fire, Julia told Max and Zoe about the sanctuary cave and the people who had found refuge there. She promised to honor that legacy, using their fortune to help others and keep the island's spirit alive. As summer deepened, Whitaker's Haven blossomed into a place of life and laughter. Julia and the kids spent their days tending the garden, restoring the greenhouse, and exploring every hidden corner of the island. The air was filled with the scent of wild roses and salt, the sound of waves and birdsong. For the first time in years, Julia felt her worries fade, replaced by a sense of belonging and purpose. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the old boathouse, Zoe stumbled upon a rusted metal box buried beneath a tangle of roots. "Mom! Max! Come quick!" she called, her voice trembling with excitement. They gathered around as Julia carefully pried open the box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of journals, a silver locket, and a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The journals belonged to Julia's great-great-grandmother, Eleanor Whitaker, and chronicled her life on the island during the late 1800s. Julia read aloud as the sun dipped low on the horizon. June 3, 1887. "The island is both a haven and a mystery. Today I found a message carved into the old oak, sanctuary for all who seek it. I believe our purpose here is not just to survive, but to offer hope to those who need it most." The letters told stories of hardship and hope, of shipwrecked sailors nursed back to health, of runaway children given shelter, of families fleeing persecution who found a new beginning on Whitaker's Haven. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of the island's legacy. Max, ever the mapmaker, traced the journeys described in the journals, adding new landmarks to his growing chart of the island. Zoe, inspired by Eleanor's words, began writing her own stories, imagining the lives of those who had come before. That evening, as they sat around the fire, Julia realized that the island's greatest treasure was not gold or jewels, but the spirit of generosity and kindness that had defined her family for generations. She resolved to continue that tradition, using their newfound wealth to help others and preserve the island's history. The next day, Julia contacted a local architect to discuss restoring the old guest house near the eastern shore. Her vision was to create a retreat for families in need, a place where they could heal, rest, and find hope, just as her ancestors had intended. The architect, moved by the island's story, offered to donate his time and expertise. As the project took shape, Julia reached out to organizations on the mainland, inviting them to partner in the creation of the sanctuary. Word spread quickly, and soon, volunteers arrived to help with repairs, plant gardens, and share their own stories of resilience. The island became a place of community, a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. Julia watched as her children flourished, their days filled with purpose and joy. Max led nature walks for visiting families, teaching them about the island's history and wildlife. Zoe organized art classes in the greenhouse, encouraging children to express their dreams and fears through painting and drawing. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color, Julia stood on the porch, watching families gather around the fire. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the island, for her children, and for the chance to make a difference in the world. As the stars appeared overhead, Julia whispered a silent promise to her great-uncle and all those who had come before. "I will honor your legacy. I will keep this sanctuary alive." That night, as she tucked Max and Zoe into bed, Julia felt a peace she had never known. The island had given them more than a home. It had given them a purpose, a family, and a future filled with hope. Autumn arrived on Whitaker's Haven in a riot of color, the trees blazing gold and crimson against the deep blue of the sea. The air grew crisp, and the days shortened, but the island's spirit only seemed to grow warmer. Julia and the children settled into a new routine, balancing schoolwork and chores with the ongoing restoration of the guest house and the daily joys of island life. The first families arrived in late September, referred by shelters and community organizations on the mainland. Julia welcomed them with open arms, showing them the trails, the gardens, and the secret places that had become so dear to her own family. She watched as children who had known only fear and uncertainty began to laugh and play, their burdens lightened by the island's peace. One evening, as Julia sat on the porch with a mother named Carla, the two women shared stories of hardship and hope. Carla, who had fled an abusive relationship with her two young sons, spoke of the relief she felt on the island. "It's like the world can't touch us here," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "For the first time in years, I feel safe." Julia squeezed her hand. "That's what this place is for. My family built it as a sanctuary, and now it's yours too." As the weeks passed, the guest house filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of home-cooked meals. Volunteers from the mainland came to help with repairs, teach classes, and share their own skills. Max organized a treasure hunt for the children, leading them to hidden corners of the island and sharing the stories he'd uncovered in the family journals. Zoe taught art classes in the greenhouse, her gentle encouragement helping even the shyest children find their voice. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the western cliffs, Julia and Carla discovered a stone marker half buried in the earth. The inscription read, For those who seek hope, let this island be your home. Beneath the marker, they found a small tin box containing a letter from Eleanor Whitaker, written in 1892. To the future keepers of Whitaker's Haven, may you always remember that the greatest treasure is not gold or jewels, but the love and kindness you share with others. Let this island be a light in the darkness, a place where all are welcome. Julia read the letter aloud to the families that evening, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. The words resonated with everyone gathered around the fire, a reminder that they were part of something larger than themselves. As autumn deepened, Julia received a letter from the Historical Society in Boston. Dr. Carter wrote to inform her that the family's trust, thanks to careful management and the growth of its investments, was now valued at over $250 million. The news was staggering, but Julia's first thought was of the island and the people it served. With the trust secure, Julia established a foundation dedicated to preserving Whitaker's Haven and supporting families in need. She worked with lawyers and advisors to ensure that the island would remain a sanctuary for generations to come, its resources used to help others find hope and healing. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the island in white. Julia and the children decorated the house with garlands of pine and holly, preparing for their first holiday season on the island. The guest house was filled with families, their laughter and joy echoing through the halls. On Christmas Eve, Julia stood on the porch, watching the snow fall softly over the island. She thought of her great-uncle, of Eleanor, and of all those who had come before. She felt their presence in the quiet beauty of the night, in the warmth of the firelight, and in the love that filled the house. As midnight approached, Julia gathered everyone around the fire. She read aloud from Eleanor's journal, sharing the story of the island's first Christmas, a story of hope, generosity, and the enduring power of family. As she finished, she looked around at the faces glowing in the firelight, and knew that Whitaker's Haven had truly become a sanctuary once more. The new year dawned bright and cold, the island sparkling beneath a layer of frost. Julia stood at the kitchen window, watching Max and Zoe race across the yard with a group of children from the guest house, their laughter rising into the clear winter air. The island, once a place of mystery and uncertainty, had become a home not just for Julia's family, but for many others seeking a fresh start. With the foundation now established and the trust secure, Julia began to dream bigger. She reached out to educators, therapists, and artists, inviting them to spend time on the island and share their knowledge with the families who came to stay. Soon, Whitaker's Haven was hosting workshops on everything from gardening and cooking to painting and storytelling. The island became a place of learning and growth, a living tribute to the generations who had built it. One afternoon, as Julia was sorting through a box of old letters in the study, she found a sealed envelope addressed to the keeper of Whitaker's Haven. Inside was a letter from her great-uncle Charles, written just months before his death. Dear Julia, if you are reading this, then the island has found you, as it found me. I hope you have discovered its secrets and its joys. Remember, the true wealth of Whitaker's Haven is not in its land or its treasures, but in the lives it touches. Use what you have been given to help others, to build a legacy of kindness and hope. The world will always need places like this, places where the lost can be found and the broken can be made whole with love. Julia pressed the letter to her heart, feeling the weight of her great-uncle's words. She knew that her family's legacy was now hers to carry forward. As winter melted into spring, the island came alive with new growth. The gardens flourished, the greenhouse overflowed with flowers and vegetables, and the guest house welcomed a steady stream of families. Julia watched as children who had arrived frightened and withdrawn blossomed into confident, joyful individuals. She saw parents find hope and strength, supported by the community that had grown around them. One evening, as Julia walked along the beach, she found Max sitting on a driftwood log staring out at the sea. He looked up as she approached, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't come here?" he asked. Julia smiled, sitting beside him. "All the time. I think about how different our lives would be. But I also think that maybe, somehow, we were always meant to find this place." Max nodded. "I want to help keep it safe, Mom. I want other kids to feel what I feel here." Julia hugged him, her heart full. "You will, Max. This island is yours as much as it is mine. Someday, you and Zoe will be its keepers." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Julia felt a deep sense of peace. She knew there would be challenges ahead. Storms to weather, secrets yet to uncover. But she also knew that Whitaker's Haven would endure, its legacy carried forward by the love and hope of all who called it home. That night, as she tucked Zoe into bed, her daughter whispered, "I think the island is magic, Mom. It makes people better." Julia smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Zoe's forehead. "Maybe it is, sweetheart. Or maybe it just reminds us of what's possible when we believe in each other. As she turned out the light, Julia glanced out the window at the moonlit island. She thought of the generations who had come before, of the treasures they had hidden and the stories they had shared. She knew that the greatest gift she could give her children, and all who came to Whitaker's Haven, was the promise of a place where hope could always be found. Spring brought new beginnings to Whitaker's Haven. The far island buzzed with activity as volunteers and guests worked side by side, planting gardens, repairing fences, and painting the guest house in cheerful colors. Julia marveled at how quickly the community had grown, each person adding their own story to the island's tapestry. One morning, as Julia and Zoe tended the vegetable beds, a letter arrived from a university professor who specialized in maritime history. He had heard about the island's archives and asked if he could visit to study the old maps and journals. Julia welcomed him, eager to learn more about the island's past. Professor Bennett arrived with a stack of reference books and a contagious enthusiasm. He spent days poring over the family's collection, cross-referencing maps and letters, and interviewing Julia and the children about their discoveries. One afternoon, he called Julia into the study, his eyes alight with excitement. "Julia, I believe your family played a much larger role in local history than anyone realized. These journals mention shipwrecks, rescues, and even coded messages sent during wartime. Whitaker's Haven was more than a sanctuary. It was a hub for underground networks, a safe harbor for those fleeing danger." Julia listened, fascinated, as Professor Bennett explained how the island's location and secrecy had made it a perfect refuge for people escaping persecution, war, and even natural disasters. He showed her a coded letter from the 1940s which, once deciphered, revealed a list of names, families who had found safety on the island during World War II. Max, who had been listening from the doorway, asked, "Does that mean we're related to heroes?" Professor Bennett smiled. "In a way, yes. Your ancestors risked everything to help others. That's a legacy to be proud of." Inspired by the professor's research, Julia decided to create a small museum in the old barn, dedicated to the island's history and the people it had sheltered. Volunteers helped clean and restore the space, and soon the barn was filled with artifacts, photographs, and stories from generations past. The museum became a gathering place for guests and locals alike, a place to learn, reflect, and celebrate the island's legacy. School groups from the mainland visited on field trips, and families who had once found refuge on the island returned to share their memories. One afternoon, as Julia gave a tour to a group of children, she noticed an elderly woman standing quietly by the memorial stone. Julia approached her, sensing that she was more than just a visitor. "My name is Anna," the woman said softly. "I lived here for a time many years ago. My family came during the war. Your great-grandmother saved our lives." Julia felt tears prick her eyes. "Welcome home, Anna. Would you like to share your story?" Anna nodded, her voice trembling as she recounted her family's journey to the island, the kindness they had received, and the hope they had found. Her story moved everyone who heard it, a living testament to the island's enduring spirit. As spring turned to summer, Julia realized that Whitaker's Haven had become more than a sanctuary. It was a beacon, drawing people from all walks of life to its shores. The island's legacy of compassion and courage continued to grow, each new story adding to its wealth. One evening, as the sun set over the water, Julia stood on the porch with Max and Zoe, watching the lights of the guest house twinkle in the dusk. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she was honoring her family's legacy and building a future filled with hope. As summer unfolded, Whitaker's Haven became a place of celebration and remembrance. The island's first annual Heritage Festival was Julia's idea, a way to honor the past, bring the community together, and share the island's story with the world. Word spread quickly, and soon families, volunteers, and former guests arrived by ferry, eager to take part in the festivities. The festival was a whirlwind of activity. There were guided tours of the museum and secret chambers, storytelling circles around the fire, and workshops on everything from traditional crafts to genealogy. Max led a scavenger hunt for children, using clues from the old family journals. Zoe organized an art show in the greenhouse, displaying paintings and drawings inspired by the island's beauty and history. Julia watched with pride as the island buzzed with life. She saw old friends reunited, new friendships formed, and children running free across the meadows. The highlight of the festival was a lantern ceremony at dusk. Each guest wrote a message of hope or remembrance on a paper lantern, then released it into the sky. The sight of hundreds of glowing lanterns drifting over the water brought tears to Julia's eyes. During the festival, Julia was approached by a woman named Grace, who introduced herself as a descendant of one of the families who had found refuge on the island during the war. Grace shared a letter her grandmother had written, describing the kindness she'd received from Eleanor Whitaker and the sense of safety she'd felt for the first time in years. Julia invited Grace to speak at the closing ceremony. As Grace read her grandmother's letter aloud, the crowd listened in silence, moved by the story of courage and compassion. When she finished, Julia stepped forward and spoke from the heart. This island has always been a place of hope, a sanctuary for those in need. My family's greatest treasure is not the land or the fortune, but the legacy of kindness and resilience passed down through generations. Today we honor that legacy by opening our hearts and our home to all who seek refuge. The applause was thunderous, and Julia felt the weight of her ancestors' dreams settle gently on her shoulders. She knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. After the festival, Julia received letters and emails from people all over the world, some sharing their own stories of survival, others asking how they could help. The Foundation's endowment grew as donations poured in, allowing Julia to expand the sanctuary's programs and offer scholarships to children from families in crisis. With the additional resources, Julia hired counselors, teachers, and artists in residence to support the families who came to the island. She established a scholarship fund in Eleanor Whitaker's name, ensuring that every child who passed through the sanctuary would have the opportunity to pursue their dreams. As the summer waned, Julia took time to reflect on all that had changed. She walked the island's trails with Max and Zoe, marveling at how much they had grown. Max was taller, more confident, his curiosity and leadership shining through. Zoe was blossoming into a talented artist, her gentle spirit touching everyone she met. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the cliffs, Max turned to Julia. "Do you think the island will always be like this?" Julia smiled, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "As long as we remember why it matters and keep sharing its story, I believe it will. This place is a promise. A reminder that hope can always be found, even in the darkest times." As the stars appeared overhead, Julia felt a deep sense of peace. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that Whitaker's Haven would endure, its legacy carried forward by the love and hope of all who called it home. As autumn returned, Julia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her and her children to Whitaker's Haven. The island, once a place of mystery and uncertainty, had become a thriving sanctuary, a living testament to the power of hope, kindness, and family. The guest house was rarely empty now, and the museum's guest book filled with messages from visitors whose lives had been touched by the island's magic. One blustery afternoon, Julia received a letter from a documentary filmmaker who had heard about the island's history and the Foundation's work. The filmmaker, Maya Lin, wanted to create a film that would share the story of Whitaker's Haven with the world. Julia hesitated at first, protective of the island's privacy, but after discussing it with Max and Zoe, she agreed. They all felt the world could use more stories of hope. Maya arrived with a small crew, respectful and eager to listen. She spent weeks interviewing Julia, the children, former guests, and volunteers. She filmed the lantern ceremony, the art classes in the greenhouse, and quiet moments of reflection by the memorial stone. She captured the laughter of children, the tears of parents, and the beauty of the island in every season. During the filming, Maya uncovered a new layer of the island's history. While interviewing Anna, the elderly woman who had once found refuge on Whitaker's Haven, Maya learned of a hidden cove on the north side of the island. Anna described it as a place of solace, where she and her mother had planted wildflowers and left a small box of keepsakes as a tribute to their new beginning. Julia, Max, Zoe, and Maya hiked to the cove, guided by Anna's memories. They found the spot, a quiet, sheltered beach ringed with wildflowers. Beneath a flat stone, they unearthed a tin box containing a faded photograph, a child's drawing, and a letter written in careful script. "To the future, may you find peace and joy on this island, as we did. Remember that every act of kindness plants a seed that will bloom for generations." Julia read the letter aloud, her voice trembling with emotion. Maya filmed the moment, capturing the sense of connection that spanned decades and continents. The documentary, titled Sanctuary: The Story of Whitaker's Haven, premiered at a local theater that winter. The audience was moved to tears by the stories of resilience, generosity, and transformation. The film quickly gained attention, winning awards and inspiring viewers around the world to support the Foundation's mission. Donations poured in, and Julia was able to expand the sanctuary's reach even further. She established partnerships with organizations across the country, offering retreats for families in crisis, scholarships for children, and training for community leaders who wanted to create sanctuaries of their own. Through it all, Julia remained grounded in the daily rhythms of island life. She cooked meals for the families, tended the gardens, and listened to the stories of guests who arrived seeking hope. Max continued to map the island, his charts now used to guide new arrivals on their own journeys of discovery. Zoe's art adorned the walls of the guest house and museum, her gentle spirit a source of comfort and inspiration. One evening, as the first snowflakes of winter drifted down, Julia stood on the porch with her children, watching the lights of the guest house glow in the darkness.
She thought of her great-uncle Charles, of Eleanor, of Anna, and all the others who had found sanctuary on the island.
She felt their presence in the wind, in the laughter of children, and in the quiet strength of the land itself. Julia knew that Whitaker's Haven was more than a place. It was a promise kept, a legacy of love, and a beacon of hope for all who needed it. The new year brought both challenges and triumphs to Whitaker's Haven. A fierce winter storm battered the island, toppling trees and damaging the roof of the guest house. For days, Julia and the volunteers worked side by side, clearing debris, repairing windows, and comforting families who were frightened by the howling wind. Yet even in the midst of hardship, the island's spirit endured. The community came together, sharing food, stories, and laughter by candlelight until the power was restored. When the storm passed, Julia stood on the cliffs, gazing out at the churning sea. She felt a surge of gratitude for the resilience of her family and the people who had made the island their home. The storm had tested them, but it had also reminded her of the strength that came from unity and hope. As spring returned, so did the sense of renewal. The gardens flourished, the guest house was repaired and repainted, and new families arrived, each bringing their own stories and dreams. Julia welcomed them all, remembering her great-uncle's words, "The greatest treasure is the love and kindness you share with others." One day, a letter arrived from a young woman named Sophia, who had grown up hearing stories of Whitaker's Haven from her grandmother. Sophia wrote of her struggles with anxiety and loss, and how the island's story had given her hope. She asked if she could visit, to find peace, and perhaps contribute to the sanctuary's work. Julia invited Sophia to stay for the summer. Sophia quickly became part of the community, helping in the gardens, teaching yoga classes, and sharing her own journey of healing. Her presence inspired others, and soon, more guests arrived seeking not just refuge, but transformation. The Foundation's board, now made up of former guests, volunteers, and local leaders, met regularly to plan new programs and ensure the island's future. They established a mentorship initiative, pairing families who had found healing on the island with those just arriving. They launched a scholarship for young artists and writers, honoring Zoe's creative spirit and the power of storytelling. Max, now a teenager, took on more responsibility, leading nature hikes and teaching children about the island's history and ecology. He dreamed of studying environmental science, determined to protect the land that had given his family so much. Zoe's art continued to blossom, her paintings and sculptures now exhibited in galleries on the mainland, raising funds for the sanctuary. Julia, too, found her own sense of purpose deepening. She began writing a book about the island's history, weaving together the stories of her ancestors, the families who had found refuge, and her own journey from struggle to hope. The process was healing, a way to honor the past while looking toward the future. As the anniversary of their arrival approached, Julia organized a gathering for everyone who had ever called Whitaker's Haven home. Old friends returned, new families arrived, and together they celebrated the island's legacy. There were songs and stories, shared meals, and quiet moments of reflection. At sunset, they gathered on the cliffs, each person lighting a candle in memory of those who had come before. Julia looked around at the faces illuminated by the golden light, her children, her friends, the families who had found hope on the island. She felt the weight of her great-uncle's trust, the love of her ancestors, and the promise of a future filled with possibility. As the candles flickered in the evening breeze, Julia whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. She knew that Whitaker's Haven would endure, its spirit carried forward by every act of kindness, every story shared, and every life transformed by the sanctuary's embrace. The second anniversary of Julia's arrival on Whitaker's Haven dawned clear and bright. The island bathed in golden sunlight. The air was filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers and the distant sound of waves breaking on the shore. Julia stood on the porch, watching as Max and Zoe helped set up tables for the day's celebration. Families, friends, and volunteers gathered from near and far, each person bringing a dish, a story, or a memory to share. The day was filled with laughter and music. Children raced along the trails, searching for hidden treasures Max had carefully mapped out. Zoe led an art workshop beneath the old oak tree, encouraging everyone to paint or draw their favorite memory of the island. Julia moved among the guests, her heart full as she listened to stories of hope, healing, and new beginnings. At midday, the community gathered in the meadow for a special ceremony. Julia stood before them, her voice steady as she spoke. 2 years ago, my children and I arrived on this island with nothing but hope and a little courage. We found not just a home, but a family, a community built on kindness, resilience, and love. Whitaker's Haven is more than land or fortune. It is a living promise that no one is ever truly alone, and that together we can create a sanctuary for all who need it. She invited others to share their stories. Carla, the mother who had found safety after fleeing abuse, spoke of the peace she'd discovered and the friendships she'd made. Sophia described how the island had helped her find her voice and purpose. Anna, now in her 90s, recalled the day Eleanor Whitaker welcomed her family with open arms and how that act of kindness had shaped her entire life. As the sun began to set, Julia led everyone to the cliffs overlooking the sea. Each person held a lantern, a symbol of hope and remembrance. Together, they released the lanterns into the sky, watching as they drifted upward, carrying their wishes and dreams into the evening light. Max stood beside Julia, his hand in hers. "Do you think the island will always be like this, Mom?" Julia smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "As long as we remember what matters and keep sharing its story, I believe it will. This place is a legacy, a gift we give to the future." Zoe hugged her mother, her voice soft. "Thank you for bringing us here, for believing in magic." Julia knelt, embracing her children. "You are the magic. You, and everyone who has ever called this island home." As darkness fell, the meadow glowed with lantern light and laughter. Music drifted on the breeze, and the stars appeared one by one in the clear night sky. Julia looked around at the faces of those she loved, feeling the presence of her ancestors and the promise of generations yet to come. She knew that Whitaker's Haven was more than a hidden island or a fortune measured in millions. It was a sanctuary of the heart, a place where hope was renewed, where stories were cherished, and where every act of kindness echoed across time. As the celebration drew to a close, Julia stood quietly at the edge of the meadow, gazing out at the sea. She whispered a final thank you to her great-uncle Charles, to Eleanor, to all who had come before. She promised to keep the sanctuary alive, to welcome the lost and the weary, and to pass on the legacy of love and hope that had changed her life forever. If you believe in the power of second chances, the strength of community, and the magic of hidden places, don't forget to subscribe and join us for more stories that prove the greatest treasures are always found in the hearts we touch and the lives we change.